I think my least favorite part of that was the guy at the club who thought he was a girl, and like came back later and still thought he was a girl. And I'm like, dude,
that was rough.
You gotta let this man down immediately.
And Nagisa was like, all right, look, man, I gotta tell you the truth. I can't do this no more.
The guy, he was denying it at first.
He's like, no, I'm a dude. He's like, no, you ain't. You ain't no dude.
No, you ain't.
Fine, girl, you fine. He's like, no, seriously, dude.
It's like that episode of Atlanta.
And then somebody,
yo, that's a man.
And then somebody was like, Konnichiwa, my brethren out there in the world. What's happening? My nakama. It is your boy, Bradston, on the mic with the boys, the brothers, the Super Agile Bros. You already know what it is. It's another great episode in the Super Agile world, Super Agile Nation. And of course, I got the brothers with me. We have an exciting episode today. So let me go ahead and introduce the brothers and then we'll get things rolling. Hey, brother Kyle, aka Three Hams. How are you doing, sir? How are you doing today, my brother?
Three hams will kill him. I'm doing very well today. Thank you. Thanks for asking. Konnichiwa back at you. Anything you say in Japanese, I will repeat because I know no Japanese of my own.
Oh, the Nihongo hanashimasu ka?
Nani?
There you go. I was going to say it back to me. I was like, let's see. I'll give him a basic sentence. And of course, you've probably heard him in the background, snickering, as he likes to say. Steve, what's happening, my brother? Sniggering, as he likes to say. Hey there, Steve. How are you doing?
I snigger in your general direction. Your mother smelled of Well, that came out wrong.
I'm happy. I'm happy.
Monty Python is rolling in his grave.
I'm happy it went wrong where it did, and not at the very beginning. Yeah.
Could have been worse.
I was so focused on carefully enunciating
the correct word that the rest went out the window. Totally understand.
Yeah.
Totally understand.
As elderberries.
As we learned today, there's some lyrics that we need to suppress in order to operate in life. So I totally understand.
That's so annoying. That still makes me mad.
Yeah. We I don't even want to mention it by name, but there's basically a YouTube video made by a child.
Not made by a child.
I guess.
Yeah.
True.
Made by an adult.
I guess he's
on behalf of the child.
Puppeted. Exploited might be a better
word.
Exploited.
Unfortunately.
To make this song. And we're not going to say the lyrics or what it's about. All we're going to say is that as a person who's seen some reckless things in his life and has said some reckless things in his past, I'm very ashamed of the content that was created. So anyway, that's all I'm going to say on that matter.
Yeah, that's fair.
So for our
child will have to atone for those sins.
So yes. So today is going to be a good episode, as all our other episodes are. Today we're finally living up to our final thing that we said that we'd cover on our podcast in the last. When did we even do that last? Like deciding what we're gonna cover, like 2 months ago.
It's been like
3 months,
10 episodes, maybe.
It's been a minute.
It's been a minute, man, and we'll probably discuss why this particularly took forever. But yeah, we're finally covering the anime. Yes, me. We're finally covering the anime about our dearest senpai, or really our sensei, Koro Sensei. We're going to be following, or I guess covering, deep diving into Assassination Classroom. We will be covering both seasons, season 1 and season 2. And if it wasn't for Steve, I would have probably never watched season 2 because I didn't even... I just was like, oh, season 1, that's all they got. So we're going to cover both seasons. Say this out the gate. If you're somebody who wants to watch Assassination Classroom, season 1 and season 2, we recommend that you step away from this podcast at the moment.
Be gone.
Take the time that you need, to watch the 2 seasons. And if you remember that we made this episode, come back and watch it.
If you're not old and gray.
Come back and watch this.
If you still have youth in your bones.
2 seasons is in quotes.
2 seasons, man. So
it's 2 seasons.
It's 2 seasons.
25. It's like 25 episodes each.
Man. So let's get into it, and we'll talk about the length here in a little bit. So first, I always like to ask this question anytime we do a deep dive on anything. What do you guys rate this? How did you feel about it? What is your general vibe on Assassination Classroom? What you feeling? What do y'all think? Let's start with the boy Kyle today. We normally start with Shoop. So, yeah.
Is that really? Okay. Well, yeah, I'll go. So I thought that it was good. So I mentioned, when I suggested this anime, that I watched it a little bit before and kind of fell off of it because it seemed like it was going to be a long one, which now we know. And so I'm glad, definitely glad to make the return, and also that the awareness of a season 2, because I didn't know about that either. So if I had to give it a rating, I'd probably rate it for different things. Like the art style, I really liked. A lot of the decisions they made as far as how they were lining up shots and the way that they were making, like really dramatizing things that seemed really simple. We could talk about that later too, but I really enjoyed how they did that from art. Just the decisions they were making was super interesting. The voice acting was top notch in most cases, even some familiar voices in there, which was nice. The pacing
in
for
English
the most part. Oh, I watched the dub. Good point. Yeah, so I did watch the dub. So the English voice actors were the ones that I recognized and enjoyed. The pacing overall was good. There were some places where I was like, we can move this along. Or that went by really quick and I couldn't really follow what was happening. So let me rewind for a sec. But those were few and far in between. So I'm not going to give the numbers for each of those, but all of them combined, I'd probably give it like a 7.5. Yeah. Okay. Had a good time.
Good stuff. I'm gonna go. Steve, you're going last. So,
nice.
Trying to mix it up. So, me personally, how would I review this? So, I'd probably give it the same. Just out the gate, I'm gonna give it the score. I'd probably give it the same 7.5. Maybe if I was feeling a little bitter, maybe a 6.5. But I think
bitterness
overall, I think it's just a good anime. I was thinking about it today. I was thinking to myself, like, this is the type of anime that I would never suggest to anybody. Like, I would never say, oh, man, you got to watch Assassination Classroom. But if I knew a person who was into the type of anime that this is, then I would probably suggest it. Like, the kind of coming of age, large cast, kids growing, very, like, heartfelt, meaningful type of situation. I would definitely suggest it to them, but I think I wouldn't give it like a suggestion like I would with Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood or something,
Right. Like, that's like a life-changing anime.
Like it's just no matter what kind of anime person you are, no experience or a ton, that's a great anime for you. I think, Kyle mentioned the pacing. I think the pacing is what probably destroyed the score for me the most. I think if the pacing was solid, like if it was a good pacing for me, I would have probably given it an 8, maybe a little bit more. But it really felt like, especially in the second season, and maybe we could talk about this more, I felt like most of the episodes were filler. Like, yeah, it felt like I get why they existed to like flesh out characters and give you more reasons to care about them. But honestly, I felt like you could condense most of those episodes into like one just 30 minutes of them going to each person, giving a flashback or something, and just moving on. And that's an episode I'd probably skip anyway, So, yeah, it just felt super long. I did watch it dubbed, but I did for a portion of time watch it subbed. But I actually switched back to dub because I realized it would take me a lot longer to finish it if I watched it subbed. So yeah, I mean, it was a good anime. I have different feelings about different things that happened throughout the show, but we'll get into that. So yeah, that's my take.
Okay. I don't know. I think if I had to give it a score, I'd probably be around what you guys did. I liked it a lot more than I thought I would. I'm always caught off guard. I'll talk about this more later. I am always caught off guard by how good these like contrived premise animes are.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Like just on its face, it's a story about a guy who's teaching a class, but he's a monster and they're trying to kill him. Mm-hmm. And you're like, what? How does this work? Like, what possible, like how much show can you really squeeze out of that? And I was very, very much surprised by how good it was. But like what Brad said, it wasn't like a life-changing anime. So I liked it a lot. All the art was great. It's been a while. I'm pretty sure I finished this before either of you guys. Like basically right after we decided we would watch it, I started watching it, and I watched maybe 2 or 3 episodes a day over lunch. And
you blew through it.
Yeah, I blew through it. So it's been a minute. I think I watched it in Japanese because it's probably just what I tended to do. No, I can't picture it. I'm trying to picture Koro Sensei's like distinctive laugh, and I'm like, dang, was it in? I can't remember. No, it was in English. I did watch it in English because I remember him saying, "My boy." Like Maximilian Pegasus. Yeah. Okay, so I watched it in English. It was good voice acting. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Yeah, I liked it a lot. I won't get into any more than that. It was a good show. Wasn't like mind blowing, but it's pretty good.
It's so funny, Steve, that you said like the premise thing, because my first thought, or what I was gonna throw out at y'all, just to, okay, shout out to one of our community members, Disaster Laster. He recently posted in our Discord. He was like, hey, like, what's he posted like a meme kind of thing. He's like, what's the last video game you played in the last, like, movie or something? I can't remember.
Yeah, last thing you watched.
It was last TV show and last video game.
Yeah.
Or maybe it was thing you watched. I don't know.
And I almost feel like Assassination Classroom is exactly how this was like brought
it's
together.
It's the cross of two things.
Yeah, it's like, like somebody was watching a movie about assassins and somebody was also watching a coming of age movie, and they're like, yo, wouldn't it be crazy if there's a teacher who was like an alien and he also like was teaching the students how to kill him so that he would save the world, but actually you don't know that he was actually like, like that's kind of how it felt. So my first thought was like, what did y'all think about the premise and like how it all came together? Like what it was, right. Like what is your vibe about the show and how they delivered on the premise?
So fundamentally, I appreciate how simple they made it seem. Look, when they give it to you, it's just a chunk and you're just meant to believe it for what it is. And so going into it, those first couple episodes, that's all you have to work with, is that this situation is weird and the staying power of the premise, it really doesn't have any grounds. And so it really, like from the beginning, it's like a very shaky foundation. And so it's like you almost have to kind of buy in that they're going to go somewhere with it for it to make sense. And they kind of, I guess, keep you invested by having like really good choreography and then, raising the stakes every so often, showing off new powers and abilities. And then early on, like where you're talking about in season 2, Brad, how they were doing the deep character development. They were developing the characters a whole lot quicker and like in unison and like building them up as almost like they felt like a singular character. And so you could follow the story a little bit better. They would introduce new interesting characters who would actually contribute and not just be one-offs. They'd stick around.
Yeah.
And so like, I feel like the momentum in the very beginning was like really well paced.
Yeah.
Along with the premise being given as something simple, but not really being simple. And so I felt like the premise worked very well in the beginning for sure. And then over time, when it does start to expand, I don't know how much we want to get into it, but I guess every time they drilled down, you think that was it. Like there's no way they could pile something else. And then they make another roundabout connection. Like, oh yeah, this character's been connected the whole time. And and so some of them were like a bit stretched. It's like, okay, you didn't have to do that. But then other ones were pretty interesting. So
yeah, it feels so. They tell you, they introduce the premise in the first episode, and my first reaction was like, okay, I'm clearly going to have to do a lot of suspending disbelief because they don't really like it. Just kind of gives it to you, and you're like, all right, I guess this is just how it is. But then the more you watch, the more they fill in underneath that premise. And it's like, oh, actually, like the way the world is set up, is still very contrived, but it's a lot more believable. And like the characters and motivations actually make a lot more sense. Because he wants to be a teacher. He wants to teach these kids, and you're like, okay,
but why though?
But why?
I guess he just really wants to be. He just really enjoys teaching. But then they actually eventually give you some reasoning for it, and you're like, okay, I can see why he wanted to be a teacher, and it's not just an arbitrary decision he made one day.
Yeah. So what always interesting. So before you suggested this, Kyle, as one of the shows we should watch, I started watching Assassination Classroom because I was like, this sounds like the most ridiculous thing, and it is. But I think what threw me off originally when I watched it was that it went in a completely different direction than I expected, which wasn't bad. It just wasn't what I was like trying to watch at the time. Where I thought that this was going to be more of like, I'm a big sci-fi person. I always talk about it. And I thought it was going to be more about the sci-fi than about the relationships. The interpersonal, the connections, the growth in all the characters, who they're becoming, and stuff like that. And so I know the exact episode where I stopped watching was the episode where there's that one character, one of the kids. There's so many kids' names. I'm not even going to try. Who wanted to play baseball.
Like the second or third episode.
Yeah. And I realized, I'm about to watch this weird alien gumball head dude like tutor and like have one-on-one. I figured it would just be like every episode would be him following one student and like building them up until they felt confident.
Student of the day.
Exactly.
Showing their potential. Yeah.
Yeah, until they reach the end of their arc, Luckily that wasn't exactly the path, but it was kind of close. It
was kind of close. Yeah. They mixed it up.
Yeah. Sometimes it would be like, they'd be like highlight a particular character, student. And sometimes it would be more like multiple students at the same time. And they mixed it up. But, so yeah, I wasn't.
And they spread it out.
Yeah. They spread it out. And I think that became really obvious to me toward the end of the show, where I could tell that, or at least my feeling was that the sci-fi, the reveal, the everything behind it was more just a like vehicle to make the connections in the classroom feel that much more deep instead of like interesting sci-fi, like, we're using dark matter to make him more powerful with biology, and then a rat exploded and blew the moon up, and I was like, okay, cool. This is like the rough draft of a science fiction novel to me. Yeah. But I was like, the whole point is that he made this connection with this woman who wanted to be a teacher, and then, he was a world-class assassin. So that's kind of why he naturally was like, I'm an assassin. So I'm going to teach these kids how to be assassins. And it works out perfectly because they have to kill me because
Yeah.
So
what got me thinking, or this I've been thinking about this a lot recently, but I think this show really exemplifies this idea, or this, I guess, trend, where you have these ridiculous premises. And so, it isn't just like he wants to be a teacher, but really the show is about, or what it focuses a lot on, is about like the connection between education and assassination, right? And so for anyone who hasn't seen the show and you're still listening for some reason, he's the kid's teacher. It is not a special school for assassination. They're not like, government kids or something. They're not like kidnapped orphans. They're literally at a normal middle school.
Yeah, junior high.
And this guy shows up and is like, I'm going to teach you how to kill me. But he's also teaching them like normal stuff. Like he's still teaching them math and science and history.
They're taking their exams.
Yeah, like there are whole episodes dedicated to like exams, which I didn't love. I'm like, whatever, it doesn't matter. There are whole episodes for that. Like, so this is like a normal school, and so you're like, okay, what's the connection? Somehow they managed to connect this. Like, we're learning all these things and becoming better students via the vehicle of learning to assassinate. Like somehow it's kind of silly. It's kind of dumb. Learning to assassinate somehow makes them better students in other subjects. And they're like, I really like when they're taking the tests, they'll illustrate the question. Like the tests by having them all in an arena with like armor
battle
and weapons.
Monsters,
and they're fighting these big monstrous questions. And like someone like does, you know, some quick math in his head and like finds a shortcut and is able to solve a problem quickly, and it like shows it visually. So that was kind of silly, but it was also really satisfying.
Oddly, yeah.
And when you're watching it, you're like, okay, so I feel like Western stories, it's all about like what's happening, and maybe, or it's about characters. Like you have character shows and you have like sci-fi concepts or whatever show, but you don't usually have a strong connection between the two. And this, a lot of anime, I find, it's like dumb, weird concept, but also like really compelling characters. And I don't know which one was the focus for the writers. Like it feels like either one could be you don't know whether the premise is serving the characters or the characters are serving the premise, because they work so well together.
Ooh,
so
yeah.
So you said something that I kind of disagree with, in the sense that you said they were in a normal school, and we have to talk.
Yeah.
So
no, you're right. I just, you know what I meant.
Yeah, like they're in school, but like if anything, their school is the most like ridiculous school ever. Like just on a base level, like even I think they had to all be like kind of admitted to that school. Like they actually, like from what I can,
it's like a magnet school.
Yeah, like a magnet school, and that these students in the assassination classroom are the bottom of the barrel of this basic magnet school. So they're already like pretty smart, or
they're the misfits though.
The misfits, right? And I think it's interesting because you said something. Okay, so man, you said a lot that I was thinking about.
I did say a lot, sorry.
So one thing is that this kind of reminds me of Bell in a little bit. Those exam moments. Where, remember the moment in Bell where they have the girls all gossiping and
the battlefield simulation, the gossip and stuff.
I almost felt like those moments in the show belonged in another show. Like I get why they were there; it was kind of an illustration of the battle, but
I didn't like it.
But it wasn't like an assassination, right? It was more like almost a
combat.
Yeah, like it was a big battle RPG. I mean, I'll be honest, the questions, like the designs for the questions, I really enjoyed some of them. Like the giant beetle,
they were ridiculous.
Beetle tank that was like, or the giant cuboid angel statue looking. I was like,
oh yeah, that was my favorite one.
Yeah, it was for the final question that Karma and the other kid. But to me, it felt like it was very much a story about, like, if I were to say the main premise was like this thing that only Japanese people probably really understand, this connection between your schooling and your destiny, right? Like, because they are heavily examined in Japan, right?
Education is crazy.
You take tests all throughout your life to get to this point. You got a test to get into your middle school, test to go into your high school, test to get into, secondary or whatever. Or I guess college. And I feel like this was like one of those stories where it's like, hey kids, you have a lot more potential, and you don't have to look at what the system is telling you have to be what you are, And they use Koro Sensei as the vehicle in the assassination classroom. So I feel like what it was trying to be was almost like a metaphor for the Japanese culture and student about accomplishing something if they have the right person in their life or something. That's kind of how I felt.
Yeah, it was a surprisingly deep show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And from the beginning, I would have to say, like, going back to you guys mentioning, I guess, how Western storytelling usually goes. In the beginning, I can remember thinking that, Koro Sensei is going to have a dark side, or he's going to betray the system, because when they reveal the premise, it's all based on like this trust that they can't defeat Koro Sensei. So if you're still listening, by the way, and you haven't looked up anything about the show, so Koro Sensei is this giant yellow octopus man who can move at Mach 20. He can't be killed by normal means. Like, he can survive like nuclear blasts and stuff. And so they have to make like special gadgets to kill him with. And so they're putting him in this classroom and saying, okay, the deal is you can teach this class as long as you don't kill the kids. But then on the other side of that, there's nothing anybody could do if he decided to break that contract at any point. And so in the back of my mind, I was thinking that eventually he was going to at some point. So massive spoiler alert, he doesn't, which makes, I guess, always builds kind of the suspense because he does get frustrated at times. There are times where he shows like enormous signs of weakness, leaves himself vulnerable because he does make a genuine connection with these kids, which is super unexpected as well. Because it all feels like he's playing up an act. Because he's got this big smile on his face. You don't know where he came from.
Goofy looking, real cheery.
Yeah. And it's like, and he didn't deny the fact. It's like, oh yeah, either you, and he even says it himself, like either you kill me or I'm going to blow up the world. And the way he says it makes it seem like it's something, it's intentional. He's going to do, like he came to Earth to do this.
Yeah.
Nobody knows his origin. And so that's the typical trope. And so for that to kind of get flipped on its head as the story progressed, and then things come to light saying, oh, the reason why he's going to destroy the world isn't intentional. It's like, oh, wait a minute. I wasn't expecting a twist like that. And so it really makes you, I guess, it knocks you off balance if you're trying to predict what's going to happen in the show pretty much at every turn because they just do something completely outlandish. But it still makes sense in the world.
Yeah, and I think that's like where Japanese anime has always been a step above. Where they it's hard because like you're saying, like to compare a Japanese animation to like an American style animation, it just feels so much more deep. Like even if you don't understand where the deepness is, it feels like it has something to say and it has a purpose, and it's also very interconnected to culture, but it's also very interconnected to aspirational thoughts and then like Koro Sensei is clearly over the top positive, right? Like he believes in the students. He's like tutoring them all at the same time, doing like, regular side
flash step puppets.
Flash step, doing some One Punch Man stuff. And like you said, I expected the moment to be toward the end of the show that his trigger flips. And he becomes the all-destructive being that he was made to be, Like the, have y'all seen the Iron Giant?
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of like the Iron Giant, It's, spoiler alert. The Iron Giant. I'm not really saying anything about it. But
it's fine.
But at the end of the day, like the Iron Giant's purpose or Koro Sensei's purpose is not one that is to benefit society. It's just more or less a coincidence that things worked out the way that they did. And I was just waiting for that. Oh, there's a trigger. There's a word, image, something, needed to happen for him to go into all destruction mode or something. But that never came.
Yeah.
That never came.
And he's off the cuff shown to be extremely dangerous. Right? But he never uses his abilities to be dangerous. Even when he's fighting like people who actually are on his level, he's extremely soft with them.
You're careful, yeah.
Because he considers, like, what is it? So there's a kid who is also implanted with the same like tentacle powers as Koro Sensei. And they send this kid to the classroom under the guise of like, oh, he's joining the class. Yeah. But then it's like a very weak disguise because he immediately attacks Koro Sensei. It's like, I don't know why they even bothered to like say, hey, he's a student here. He could have just shown, maybe it was for the government. I don't know. But he shows up as a student. And from that moment, Koro Sensei is like, okay, well, he's my student. So I'm going to treat him like I treat all the rest of my students and believe in him and treat him gently and do all this stuff, even though he's literally trying to murder him. Well, they're all trying to murder him, but I guess he was different. Yeah, it was really interesting how they did that. He's like saccharine sweet. Yeah. It's too sweet.
There were those moments where he would get really angry, and I was hoping for kind of that there was more moments like that where like he was like he turned into that like black red like crazy
demon monster,
crazy face, and he'd like get in your face and like if you did something. Like I was hoping for more moments like that, but they were very specific, right? Like, oh,
they're very few and far between, and they didn't lead to anything.
Yeah.
And I think what we got instead was better. Like, we got to see how intelligent and resourceful he was.
Mm-hmm.
If there was an issue, like there were enemies in the show, and some of them were like physically on his level, and he had to fight them. But some of them were just like, there were other obstacles. So like the principal of the school is an enemy, but instead of using force with the principal, he has to use guile. He has to like outwit him and outmaneuver him, and that was so much fun to watch. It was so satisfying to see him and his students, maneuvering in this weird class system.
Yeah, because that was something that he was teaching them too. And so another thing, I guess, because he's a monster, you expect him to like forego values, but he was instilling the values in them. It's like, assassination isn't like about bloodlust. It's an art, it's a craft. When you assassinate somebody, you do it respectfully, and you don't all those different things. And so like that was transferring over to the educational side. But then even when they would have scuffles, and when they were trying to save their classmates, they thought they were going to die. Even then they were like, well, we're not going to kill anybody while we're doing this. Yeah. And it was like even showing those times of restraint. And then so seeing Koro Sensei grow from becoming this enraged demon, which was closer to who he was before, into pretty much at the end of the show, every time he showed his most powerful, it was like beams of white light. And so it was like he made a complete transition from being an evil character who was seen as bringing darkness to someone that literally, and maybe either through intellect or power, shines a light on the situation to where it improves that way with the least amount of damage being done.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting that I don't know how quickly this happened, but they dispelled the idea that he was an alien. I
think it was like in the first episode, he said, I am not an alien.
Like pretty early in the show, and I thought they were going to leave that longer as a mystery. But I thought by them doing that, they kind of immediately humanized him. Mm-hmm. That meant that his motivations were not alien, Right. Like they were actually, human. They were like very much either altruistic or chaotic neutral or,
or selfish.
Yeah, there's something in there. And I think that the reveal of him being an assassin, that kind of just made sense. But I don't think in my mind I would have ever assumed that he was an assassin. Just even his character and the way that he interacted with the students, it very much felt like he was a person who fundamentally was a pure person who kind of maybe he was a scientist. That's what I thought it was going to be, like a scientist who got caught up or something.
That's really funny because you're usually the one who can see through the twists, or you're always trying to figure out what the secret is.
Well, it's funny because what I told you earlier, and the reason why I probably didn't even do that is because I didn't think that this, like, once I saw the direction of the show, I didn't think that the reveal was going to be that important anyway. I thought it was just going to be like a type of thing where it's just like, oh, like, this is it, and it kind of was how they did it. But
yeah, it wasn't that important. So, it was interesting.
So I didn't really think too much about his origin after episode 3. I was just
in this show. Yeah, it was built on like a lot of misdirection too.
Yeah, they were very cagey.
Yeah, and so I wouldn't say that the reveals felt unearned. Or it's like you pulled that out, like the Scooby-Doo reveals they used to do, where it's like, oh, it was that character we showed for half a second at the beginning of the show. You were supposed to figure that out. Now, it was never that egregious, but it was always something that was, sometimes it was subtle, sometimes it was apparent. And so, but most of the time it was something that you really wouldn't pick up on because they thought of the first thing and it's like, okay, people would predict that. And they thought of the second thing, like some people would predict that. And so they went with the third thing that most people wouldn't predict.
I honestly think it's one of those situations where this wasn't a clever show. It was just a show that where they just didn't tell you a thing. It doesn't matter how much you thought about it. Like,
they would. We don't know enough about what's going on.
It's not like they, it was one of those, like you said, like the Scooby-Doo effect, where it's like, it was him the whole time. Or like, oh, we've introduced to you all of the things that you need to know that you can kind of figure it out at the beginning, but we're going to reveal some information. It was just simply like linear, like, Like, they showed a flashback of something way back in the past. And I was like, there's literally no information that I've seen in these, like, 50 episodes that gives me any indication about what this means at all. Like,
that's true.
You know, it was completely arbitrary. The only thing that gave me a little bit of thought was when he said, "This is your brother," when they first introduced Tentacle Boy to the class. But then immediately they just dispelled that by just saying, "Oh, he's your brother because he's similar to you. He's not your actual brother." And I was like, okay, well, I don't like,
right.
This thread is dead, you know,
playing fast and loose,
you know.
I mean, yeah, there was a lot of misdirection. So, like, you know, he introduces himself and he says, I blew up the moon, but he didn't blow up the moon. I think that was probably one of the most integral misdirections.
Yes, that was
because it didn't fit.
For sure.
It totally, like, made every theory not fit. Like, wait, how did he get, like, why, what, what's who, like, what's going on? And then the scientist who kept showing up with, you know, with all these plans to kill him, he acted like Korra Sensei had done some horrible thing and he was a monster, he had done this and that. And then the reveal is, well, yes, he was an assassin. And yes, he did, like, break out of this facility. But that's fair play, I think, if you're being tortured and then expected to be told.
For sure.
And you were kidnapped.
And also, the scientist is like a super evil guy who just took everything super personal.
Yeah.
You know, so, like, his word is worth nothing.
Yeah, I honestly think the moon thing is dirty pool to me. Like, to me, like, you can't do that to me. Because that's like, you know, in a movie, like, imagine Goku was like, yeah, I'm a Super Saiyan, right? And then, like, so, like, you're working off that premise, and then at the end, he's like, actually, I'm just a guy wearing a suit. And it's like, well, you told me you're a Super Saiyan. Like, I'm working off of that as the only thing I know. Like, that's...
It's a bald-faced lie at that point.
It's just a lie. Yeah. Like,
but I'm okay with that because the show did not tell us that. Koro Sensei told the government that, and they related to, you know, us. And well, I guess he told the government and he told the kids. But, like, I fully expect them to not necessarily be truthful. So
that's interesting.
In retrospect, I'm like, that's fair.
That's interesting because I've never seen Koro Sensei as the type of person who is a liar. Like, he's like a person who was mysterious or was doing things without, like, telling you his intentions or his goals. But throughout the whole series, he seemed like if you asked him a question,
he was truthful.
That he would just say, like, I'm not going to answer that, or you're going to figure it out, or I'll tell you the truth. So it just seems very like they almost did that on purpose, like you said, that misdirection, because they were like, we have no other way. Because if we say the moon,
explain it,
if he says, who knows how the moon was destroyed, then you go, oh, there's something else here.
Well,
you know,
I'll give you that, but on the other hand, imagine you're in his position and you're trying to explain yourself to the government to get what you want, but you don't want to tell them everything. Practically speaking, he might as well have destroyed the moon. Like, it's the same force, the same thing's going to happen here on Earth. Like, there's all that. The only difference between him destroying the moon and the rat destroying the moon is his character and his intention, right? But, like, as far as the government or the kids are concerned, like, the same thing will happen here on Earth. So that's an understandable lie for me to make. It's a I guess a oversimplification of the truth.
And there was a pretty like a core element to the tentacles, like that they had some sort of sentience. Like, every host. They would say that the tentacle asked me what I wanted to be. Mm-hmm. And when Koro Sensei said that about the moon, it was pretty early to him, like, being integrated with his tentacles, especially on the level where he, like, completely had a metamorphosis and became this new thing. But maybe in the same loosely true way that he was brothers with Itona, maybe, you know, the tentacles kind of spoke up in a way and said, you know, I'm responsible for it because... You know,
we're all one thing.
Because of the tentacles. Yeah.
Maybe, yeah. I mean,
it's loose.
I wouldn't go that far, but that's possible.
Yeah.
That's another example, by the way, of something that I appreciated where they felt like they filled in a goofy premise. And so, like, this is kind of an aside. I'm going back to something I mentioned earlier. But, like, there was a bunch of weird details in the show that I just kind of accepted because I'm like, whatever, it's anime. So like one of them is Nagisa. He's the blue-haired kid. He's one of the main characters. He famously is small and looks like a girl and gets teased a lot about it by his classmates. And he has a real goofy haircut. But then as the show progresses, you find out that actually his haircut is there. It's a very specific reason, and it's like important. It's because his mother, I guess, feminizes him and wants to live through. Yeah, wanted a daughter, wants to live through him. Always made him wear his hair long, and he just wears it up when he's at school as kind of like the only thing he can do that his mother will allow.
And there was that connection with Kayano.
Yeah, it was a little character building too.
Yeah.
And then with Karma, you're like, okay, it's a kid named Karma. That's goofy. But then you find out later that it's like actually because it's not that important, I guess. But the fact that his parents named him that is something that he knows is silly and dumb, and is not like just a normal part of this world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the last thing was Koro Sensei's appearance. He's a giant octopus man, like you said, and he has a big old smiley face. And when you look at him, he, like, as a viewer, when you look at him, you're kind of like, did they make this character just for weird tentacle sexiness? like is that what, like, honestly, that was kind of my first impression of the show. It was like, are they just trying to make it weird? But they didn't make it weird. And you find out that part of his appearance is actually because at the end, when you find out the tentacles asked him, what do you want? And he's like, I want to be a teacher. So they made him into this, like, non-threatening, like, very happy, very, like, he has no attack power, but he has high defense
and speed. And,
like, he's very, very, he's very practically
efficient.
Good at what he does, because that's what he wanted. He wanted to be a teacher. So he has this kind of goofy, I'm like, oh, that actually, like, explains this thing that I didn't even think needed explaining. So there's a lot of cool stuff like that.
And I think that gives me more feeling that they thought more about the whole premise of the show is more about the characters themselves and their stories than any of the sci-fi or anything like that. Because, I think that's a cool thing, right? Nagisa, first of all, I have a lot of feelings about how they handled Nagisa in the show, but like his story in general about him looking like a girl and being a girl, and in the, like, the whole issue, like his mom basically having mental health issues in a way,
being a lost mom,
like, is really interesting that they use that. And then even, like you said, the connection where Kayano or whatever was like, cool, I'm gonna put his hair up so he kind of looks like me, so that people don't really notice me and I can kind of blend in a little bit more.
Make yourself more unsuspecting.
Yeah. And I was like, that's pretty clever. Like, they had some really cool, like, approaches. Like, you can feel that they really thought through the characters for the most part, And I felt that's where they were the strongest, definitely, in the characters and their, like each student was very unique. Which I thought was...
They were all really well fleshed out and distinct.
Even if they didn't have, like, a super long, like, deep episode about them, like, I felt like every student was distinct to me. Like...
And I think that's a pretty key part of the way anime is handled in general. Like, when I was in art school, there was a girl who did a lot of anime. I think I told the story before, but she drew a lot of anime, and we were having critique one day, which is when we talk about, the things that we drew. And so she drew, like, a bunch of anime characters, and some of them were more important than others, and some of them were, like, kind of background characters is what we would call them. And so the professor actually said that, like, oh, this is one of your background characters. And she was like, well, we don't call them that because, even the people that you see in the background on these animes that only are there for a few frames have a completely, like, written out character development, like where they work, their history, their age, their motivations, the reasons why they're even in this scene. Like, maybe they're going to work and while the monster's coming by, like, that's why that specific person is here. And so I feel like that's what made each of the characters, even if they kind of felt one note at times, like the one girl who was scary and emo and, wrote the scary stories, like, even she had a little bit more depth to her. And I think it's because, they had those underlying things that they thought about, with background characters. And, like, a lot of them kind of became, because, I mean, when you have a cast this big, realistically, you just can't spend as much time with each of them. And so that method when it comes to character development in anime, I think, is what lent itself very well to a cast this big. Because what, it was like 30 of them?
Yeah, it was a ton of them.
Yeah, something like that. I think it was like 25 students.
I think what, even lends even more to what the point you're making, Kyle, is that what's his name? Karma,
Yeah.
and the president's son, essentially, like, if you just like put them near each other, you'd be like, they're almost the same person. Like,
subtle differences.
Subtle differences. But to me, I never got them mixed up. Like,
right.
Like, just even even though they're both very intense, very like top of the class, blah 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 blah. They
both have red
hair. Both kind of
Short
similar
hair.
cuts. Like one is faded red, one is stronger red.
Orange.
Orange,
yeah.
The big thing is that immediately when they introduce the characters, they introduce the characters, not their like just simply what they look like.
Not their trope.
And it's like, oh, like Karma's very distinct to me because like he's literally insane. Like
Karma's gaze.
And I think that really is a testament to when you think through your characters, even if they are almost, I mean, if you think about Japanese like characters in general, it's just hair swaps. 90%
for the most part.
For the most part.
Yeah,
back in the day.
That's what I was gonna say. Like, it sounds like your friend Kyle, like maybe she puts a lot of effort and thought into her characters, but I can't say that I've seen that in a lot of anime that I've watched.
I can say that I have. So it's subtle differences. I'll give them that, because the reason why people say anime, is very similar is because they have the big eyes, the small nose, and the small mouth. But then within those are the key differences. Like, you add eyelashes, you change the eye color, the pupil size. Are there lines going through the eyes, or are they a solid color? Is it the gradient? Do they have big eyebrows or small eyebrows? Do they have wrinkles? Do they have laugh lines? Do they have facial hair? Like, it's the subtleties, I think, within anime that makes it really stand out.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, a lot of those things don't come across at a distance a lot of times.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, what I meant, not just the way characters look, but just the fact that you clearly have some characters that are just background characters. Like, if I'm ever watching a show and there's a scene in a classroom, I do not see most of the characters. I only see whoever has bright hair, and because like none of them matter. I think the first show that I've watched that challenged that was My Hero Academia, where basically every character is a main character.
Bright colors, yeah.
Well, not just because they have bright colors, but because they're actually like main characters. Like you hear their names more than twice the whole show. Like, you actually have to learn their names. Whereas most shows, it's like, it doesn't matter who that person is. It's just extra number 1, extra number 2. They're going to have very little.
But that's the thing that I think that makes this show, anime in its totality, and even this show, much more meaningful than if an American series were to do basically the same thing, which is, hey, let's do a classroom setting with a whole bunch of characters, and then like they're all kind of sort of unique. Like, I think it's kind of like what I think about art, right? Like, if you just look at art, you're like, oh, that person's pretty good at art. It looks good, it looks nice, but you have to realize that like there's so many layers to a thing that like you can't notice the layers until they're pointed out to you or they're removed. It's like if you were to take some of these Japanese shows and were to just like take out some of that depth that they naturally integrate into their shows, it would feel a lot more flat. Like, for example, a show that does this really well, for example, is Naruto. Like, there's tons of characters in that show, and yeah, they look different, but like, to me, that's not really what's important. It's that like, even if a character is not necessarily the main, like they're a background character, how Naruto deals with the room is because of that character who's sitting in the back row, who later, like 70 episodes from now, says something, and then Naruto's like, yeah, that's why I do that. It's like this deep layer that makes every character feel so much more real, because it's like it's just not a random student. Like, to you in your class, every student as a kid meant something to you. And I think that's the power that animes and like this do, they think about that.
And I think you bring up a really good point about, good design. And because I definitely agree that in crowded spaces, and so animes where there's like a full classroom, you're not going to notice those background characters. But like you said, Brad, if they're not there, you would notice. But I think that's because of the idea around good design is invisible. And so it's like if there was something wrong with those characters, like if they were just too flat, or if it was the copy-pasted character over and over again, like you see, like the backgrounds of video games and stuff, like racing games are notorious for this, where it's the same cutout of a crowd.
Oh, in the stands.
Copied and pasted, And so it completely pulls you out of it if you look at them for even 2 seconds.
Yeah.
And so it's like if they took those approaches, then you would notice that. But since they're not taking that approach, then you can focus on what they want you to focus on and not be distracted by the lack of effort they put in an area. Because they didn't. They didn't skip out on anything.
Yeah.
I stand by my thinking, which is that this show does an ensemble cast. Has a bigger cast of important characters than most other anime. And does them better. So I guess we can agree on that part at least.
Yeah, I definitely don't disagree with that.
Yeah. I think another thing that made them really interesting, all the different characters, is there were a couple episodes that were kind of like ensemble episodes. So usually it would focus on like the adventures or the thoughts or, whatever of like 2 or 3 or 1 maybe character. But there were specific episodes where they were all working together. Yeah. And it wasn't just we're all working together to kill the teacher. Because that happened, and those were really interesting. And the writers would purposefully like find ways that each different character with his or her strengths and weaknesses were like contributing to the plan. Yeah. But the most interesting part to me was the episodes that were all about teamwork but weren't about assassination. So like there's an episode where they're playing baseball or some other sport. There's a couple sport episodes. There's an episode with where they make a restaurant as a class, so somehow they find time or they find a way to like for everyone to participate. There's an episode where
the giant pudding.
Yeah, the giant pudding episode. Which sounds bonkers, but I mean we're watching this anime, so. What else did they do all together?
Yeah, I mean there was that episode, maybe I can't remember. Maybe it's already one you named, where it's like. To me, where the 2 characters who didn't mean anything to me until they like one of them like ran a restaurant, one of them's dad. Oh, like they were trying to help.
Oh yeah,
help the
Itona. Yeah,
it was the festival. It was the festival.
There was that the festival one. It was just they were trying to help Itona. Like
no, yeah, I'm wrong.
And it was like one of them had a track like that their parents owned and
motorcycles.
And it's like you start to see like and it was like you said,
these are real people.
These are people, and they have their own stories, and they're doing things, and all the characters know that about the other people. And they're like, "Oh yeah, your Brahmin is super whack." Like they're always clowning him. So let me ask y'all this: what did y'all think about? Because this is something that I was trying to figure out from the very beginning, why they chose Nagisa as the main character, because they have this giant ensemble cast, right? And so at first, I thought that the show was just going to be like, oh, it's just really about the teacher and his interaction with the students. But it became about a story about kind of sort of Nagisa and how he views the interaction of Koro Sensei with all the other students and how that impacts him to become who he becomes. But also, at times, it doesn't necessarily feel like he's always the main character, if that makes sense. Like,
I definitely feel that.
It was such a weird, because once the show started going, I was like, okay, they're really like Nagisa's the person, but why? Like I couldn't figure it out. I mean, like eventually you figure out he's talented for Assassination and stuff, and I was like, cool, but where are they going with this? Like,
right? Yeah, like his backstory didn't seem to be like any more. It was tragic, but they all seem to really have like tragic backstories whenever they start to reveal them. Like one girl, went against what her parents' wishes were because that's not who she wanted to be. And then some of them were, Itona's story was super tragic, even Koro Sensei's. And so it's like, The only thing I guess kind of tipped me off at the beginning, like at the very beginning, was I was like, "Oh, this kid has the brightest blue hair, so he must. I guess he's gonna be the main
looks
character."
Like a bird nest. Over
yeah. So I was like, maybe he is gonna be the main character. But then, like when they brought Karma in, of course he had the classic red versus blue. That's his antagonist. Oh, they used to be friends. Ah, okay, well,
and they're actually like very friendly the whole show.
Yeah. And so I think it was just another one of those things where they kind of put the common trope on its head, but they still needed like a foundational character for the viewer to follow. But they still didn't just leave it up to Nagisa. Like you could argue that Koro Sensei was just as important as far as like a main character goes to Nagisa because of how much I guess he helped to progress the plot.
Yeah.
I think the reason my takeaway at the end was the reason that Nagisa was the I guess the main protagonist or focused on compared to the rest of the classmates is because he as we're learning more about Koro Sensei, we're also seeing how Nagisa is the most like Koro Sensei.
True.
I think that was because he ends up being a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, I could be an assassin. I'm really good at this. I'm fearless. But
Natural assassin.
But then he's like, oh, actually, I'm going to switch and be a teacher. So we kind of see like maybe this could have been Koro Sensei's life if things had gone a little different, if he hadn't become the Reaper.
Yeah.
Right. And so that was kind of, it was, I think that was part of the reasoning behind it was that he was like that.
Yeah. It's kind of one of those things where like Ichigo is the main character in Bleach, right? And it's like really obvious why, like he's the chosen one and some reason he's special. You know what I'm saying? Like that's obvious. Naruto's the main character. Like those kind of make sense. But Nagisa felt like it could really be anybody if it's just he's the best narrator, right? Like that's kind of what it felt like. He's the best narrator, and he also seems to be very like take a lot of notes and like plan things, and like people see him as a person who like oh, he's kind of like to himself, but he's also like really smart. So
ooh,
yeah, go ahead.
So you actually just made me think of something. So the fact that Nagisa, because the kids like they always tended to do those things that they were naturally gifted at and would have the tendency to do. And so it seemed like, they would say he was the best at like taking notes and figuring out Koro Sensei's weaknesses. And they would go to him for the book. And I think you might have said this before, Brad, but it's somebody else's quote. But it's like something along the lines of the war is won, or the story of the war is like only given by the victors. Something like that. So
history is told by the winners.
And so what if the situation is because Nagisa is the narrator, that's the reason why he's the main character. Saying that to say if Karma would have been the narrator for the show, he would have been the main character. So it's not so much that he had precedence, it's just that we're more in tune with what he was doing because character wise, he was more in a dispositioned, I guess in the same way that Ichigo was the chosen one, to take notes on the situation and then as a teacher tell the story to someone else.
He was the most tuned to what was happening. And I mean, and it was even said, many times that he was a natural. Once they got to like the assassination part, everybody was like, okay, Nagisa, like you're
anaconda
way too good at this. Like that whole, so one thing I want to mention about this show personally, and maybe I'll feel differently. I felt like the first season was a lot stronger than the second season.
100%.
I feel like the first season had so much like ups and downs in dynamics that the second season just felt like it was just prolonging. It was just like, we got to get to the end, but we don't have.
But isn't that always how the second semester of school is?
It just the drones on and on.
Like, it was like all of the growth happened in the first season, and the second season was just them waiting out, like you said, the time till like March or whatever. And it was just what they were up to until that point came, right? Because think about all the cool things that happened in that first season. First season, everybody figures out that Nagisa is a beast. Right, like remember that moment when Karasuma is his name? Karasuma,
the PE teacher from the government.
Well, no, the guy who's like the main government. Is that the PE teacher? Yeah.
Yeah,
he becomes a
Karasuma.
PE teacher.
Yeah, Karasuma. Like when Karasuma was like standing there, and I guess Nagisa approached him or was like behind him, and he was like, "What in the?" Like all of a sudden he was like, "What in the?"
Threw a child.
He like threw up his dukes.
Like, he just like was like, I don't know what just happened, but like.
Karma was like, you reacted kind of hard to that, you know?
It was like, and I actually wish they had kind of continued down that route a little bit more about Nagisa being like this a beast. I just love that moment, like him just being like, hold up, I like
something ain't right.
Like his cat sense is like, yo, I don't feel right here. Like I feel really in danger.
Yeah, that was actually a small disappointment for me. So before I watched this show, I actually had seen a couple clips on YouTube, and they were all about Nagisa. And there was just several moments from the show where like Nagisa's being a beast. Yeah. So like,
so
Nagisa, Nagisa, yeah, a little bit. But I had no context for these clips. I didn't know what was going on. So I was like, oh, Nagisa fights, the sadistic dad PE teacher guy.
That dude.
Oh, Nagisa fights the sadistic guy again. Nagisa does this. And I was like, oh, this show's kind of dope. But then when I watched the show, I was like, oh, those are like literally the only moments that have like
highlights. Yeah.
Truly.
Nagisa fights Karma. But I think, and it is disappointing. First of all, it's disappointing. But I feel a little okay about it because it turns out that's not the premise of the show, right? Like at the end of the show, he decides, I don't want to be an assassin. I want to be a teacher. Mm-hmm. And so I think like the lack of focus on that aspect of his personality kind of matches where the show ended up going. Yeah. Like it would have been weird if it's like, hey, it's like a happy-go-lucky show where like the students might have to kill their teacher, but they're all learning like all these life lessons and like getting better and better and becoming a strong team. But then also in the corner, one kid is just like, I can murder anybody. It'd be a little weird.
To me, I thought the show was going to go really dark, like, and kind of like on the point you made earlier, Kyle, about like Koro Sensei maybe switching evil and going like real bad. And when I started to think like, oh, this show might have a dark side, a lot more darker, is when they did introduce the father-like figure as the new PE teacher.
Oh, yeah. I thought they were going to.
And then, like, Karasuma's, like, going through the stuff. And then he, like, sees the pictures of, like, oh, my goodness. He's like, oh, snap. This is a problem. And then the teacher is like, hey, y'all are, like, my family, my kids. And then when the kid's like, I don't know. And he just, wow. Like, and everybody's like, what in the world? And then all of a sudden I was like, yo, this show is about to go somewhere.
Bro. Like, yeah, Takaoka, he's definitely my least favorite character of the whole show. Like,
he's the heel.
They wrote him to a T as far as being like perfectly, like believably unlikable and unhinged. Like, yeah, I was rooting for that character to be killed. For real, I can't even lie.
I mean, he was straight punching children, straight up. Like he was not playing. And then when Nagisa did the whole like approach him,
emasculated that man,
and he just went insane. Like he was like, I got emasculated by a boy who looks like a girl, and I don't know what to do with myself. Like, who am I? And he creates this whole like plot to like it was crazy. Like to me, I thought that's why I feel like the show felt like a different show. Like the first season felt like an actual moving plot, and they had goals and destinations, and the secrets were starting to get revealed about things. And then like second season was like, hey, let's just enjoy it. Like we're kids. It's summertime.
Yeah.
They focused a lot more on the school stuff. So like, issues with the bullies and with the principal. They did a lot more character development for like the other characters who hadn't gotten any love yet. I don't think that we saw like, the three or four like delinquent type characters. I forget their names. No one's a bully. Everyone kind of ggets along in the show, but there's like three or four characters, including the spooky girl
and the guys.
Yeah. They didn't really have. I didn't even realize that they weren't like getting with the program.
Wait. Who are y'all talking about? Now I'm confused.
The bully of the classroom, like the buff guy who would always get into it with Karma.
The guy
with the like brown and black hair, kind of.
Yeah. And then the spooky girl was part of that group too. and there was like two of his lackeys. Basically, the guys who took in
Itona?
Yeah, those guys. He kind of became part of that group, which is really funny because you wouldn't expect them to take anybody in. Anyway, I didn't even realize that they like weren't with the program. Actually, no, that was before Itana, which means that was in the first season. Right? Didn't Itana join the class in the first season?
The second. He joined briefly before he immediately attacked Koro Sensei. And then left.
Didn't he actually like?
He joined in the
become
second
a good
season.
person
in the second season.
Oh,
he became a good person.
So that I was right. Yeah, that whole bit where like there's an episode where basically that gang just him, just the Hirasaka. He's kind of manipulated by this evil, spooky scientist into joining a plot against Koro Sensei.
Yeah.
And that's the first episode where I was like, oh, like I just realized like he hasn't really been part of the other action for the most part. Like he hasn't really been like none of them have really been like participating in the class that much, and their grades aren't that good.
Yeah.
And so like, I felt like maybe it took a while for the show to get around to them. But that is one of the things that the second season managed to do. It was like, all right, we got a little more character development for some of these guys.
But I think it like actually tracked really well how they did it, because it's like him being a pawn and stuff like that, and like I keep want to call him Karuma, but Karma like being like, yeah, you're just a pawn, like you're not even that cool, like you think you're great.
Yeah.
But like also like Koro Sensei, like almost like getting him to realize like, bro, this isn't gonna work for you. You need to grow up and realize like you can be something better than you are. And it's like, it kind of made sense that he was always background. Like he didn't want to be there. He thought this was all stupid. Yeah. And it's like, I thought it was pretty good. Like not that you didn't think that either, but I just thought generally, I was like, oh, that's a cool way to kind of like make sense why he kind of wasn't important until he was, because he didn't want to be there. And he was just biding his time to get out, because there's always that super delinquent, like there's always the guys like, no, I'm not getting better. Da, 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 da. And, even, Koro Sensei was even able to reach him. And then he became, who he became.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was like a lesson of patiently waiting for the student to be ready for the teacher to come.
Yeah.
Because like he couldn't go anywhere being in class E, especially if he's only getting worse. So,
You staying in E. You ain't going there.
Yeah. So I have one thing I want to say, if Kyle, you don't have anything else to add. But then after that, I also have a question. So
no, you can go ahead.
All right. So I just want to say that I feel like probably for me, one of the weakest points isn't necessarily how slow the second season was, but how overpowered Koro Sensei was. Because I felt like every single time we found out a lot of his weaknesses as the show goes on. But it also feels like every single time he was in a pinch, he would have some secret technique.
Yeah, plot armor.
Plot armor. This man had the most egregious, ugly, honestly kind of ugly plot armor.
It was very ugly at times.
But like, let me think about the things that he did. He basically got by the whole class. They had this whole setup,
which was gangster,
like the beach, the island setup. And then he was like, actually, I can become like invincible.
Ball. Yeah.
That was dumb. When the government guy, when they're all being attacked by the Reaper, and they're like in his weird dungeon, and Karasuma's finding him, and the Reaper uses like his secret weapon, this like bullet out of his finger.
Yeah.
And it pierces his heart, and you're like, oh my God. But then you find out Koro Sensei had like snaked a tentacle all the way from the cell into a different room, which I don't even know how far away it was.
Through water, through sewers, yeah.
Yeah, and is pumping. First of all, he put the tentacle right over the guy's heart to block this tiny little bullet. And then he was also drinking tomato juice that he somehow had on hand.
For whatever
and was pumping
reason.
Tomato juice out, and it looked like blood. And at the same time, Karasuma knew that this was happening and that he was safe, that he should play dead and then get the guy. I was like, what? What kind of contrived bull?
It was baloney. It was 100% baloney.
And then there was a part at the end where Kayano, whatever her name was.
Kayano, yeah.
She basically gets killed.
She was impaled.
Yeah.
By this giant monster. And then at the end, Koro Sensei's like, yeah, I just picked up all her blood out of the air.
Her cells. And then perform surgery.
Cells, and I can just, not even surgery, he just put each cell, like it was surgery.
But also, are we gonna,
no scars?
Are we going to talk about the mad creepy thing that he did in that process? Where apparently he also enlarged her chest at the same time.
I forgot about that. I'm like, he made her bigger.
This is a child. Like,
that's creepy.
I think it was meant to be wholesome because she had a complex about her.
Was it her who had the complex about being
It was
flat?
her, yeah.
Okay.
Because her older sister was
well endowed. Yeah. So it's funny, but it's also like kind of weird. But I
mean, she's also an actress.
Yeah, that too.
So she's not just a child. She's like a well-known celebrity.
But yeah, I think Koro Sensei. So to me, I thought. So this is where this is me going into like the overanalyzing a show and realizing like, oh, none of this matters. Like where once they said the deadline was March or whatever time, I said there's zero chance that Koro Sensei dies before then.
Yeah.
Like, 100%. So to me, like every circumstance with Koro Sensei being threatened meant absolutely nothing. Because I was like, he's going to get out of it. He's going to do something weird or it's something he's not revealing. And then he says at some point, oh, I'm actually learning as well. Because after he does that weird small ball invulnerable thing, he realizes he could do that with his tentacles, like the ends of them as well or something. And I'm like, oh, like they're basically setting him up to be unkillable until he lets them kill him, or he goes off into space or something. I was like, so to me, I don't know. I just immediately was like, well, this is, let's not even worry about that. Let's just figure out what
I think that's one of the things. I think it's one of the things that kind of took all the momentum out of the second season too, is because it's almost like, I guess the writers realized that no matter what, they can't kill Koro Sensei before the date comes. Mm-hmm. And so it made the filler feel that much more like filler because it was just so apparent. Like, obviously he's not going to die before then. And obviously every attempt to kill him is going to fail. And so it's like they didn't even want to make up weird scenarios for him to get out of anymore. They were just like, what else can we do? And it made the things that the what else is a whole lot less interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's where you have to, like, from a just like writing design, you have to have some other, which they did. They did this in general, but I think they struggled where they didn't have another like narrative that could like take over that, right? Like, oh, it's all about killing Koro Sensei. Well, I liked when they brought the principal in, right?
Yeah, Asano was cool.
Because that was like, oh, it's all about defeating the principal. So you stop focusing on Koro Sensei, and then Koro Sensei was like helping them to fight that battle. And I honestly think the principal was one of my favorite characters in the show. Like his absolute first of all, can we talk about the story where he's like talking to his son, and he's like,
he just beats him. Wait, did he beat him? Maybe I'm thinking of something else.
No, like he's talking to him like him and his goons. And
he sent him
and
out,
then he was like, he was like, they were talking about like physical battle or fights. He's like, well, let me tell you a story. When I was young, I went to a dojo to like, I went to a karate dojo. He's like, oh yeah, he's telling him like, you can't accept losing or something like that. Mm-hmm. He's like, I went there and I noticed the master was this level and everybody's so much better than me. And I got beat up the first day. I trained by myself for one day.
Yeah. Second day, he said, I went back and I observed.
And then the third day, I came and I defeated the master. I mollywopped him. And I was like, this man is the most gangster human of all time.
He's a problem.
Yeah. Honestly, he was the best villain of the show. I really enjoyed him.
100%.
I love my big takeaway from, I think it was that episode, was he like sends he's like, basically the son and like his goons are like losing their kind of steam. They're like, maybe we should like go easy on, I forget exactly what it was, but they weren't willing to like, there was a limit to what they were willing to do to beat Class E.
Yeah.
And and so he's like, son, I want you to leave for a few minutes. And he came back in the room, and all of his goons were like full of hate, and there was like a dark miasma in the room, and they were just like, kill E3, kill E3. And I was like, what did he do? And then he like does it to the whole
class.
school. Like, he finds one student who's not like losing their mind studying, and he just whispers hate into his I'm like, what kind of monster? Also, the fact that man, his backstory is kind of tragic, but it's also even more gangster because like, basically, I'm going to skip a little bit, but he was a teacher, and he was teaching this difficult class. The E3, well, it wasn't an E3 class. They didn't exist back then. But he was teaching some students, and taught them all. Basically, he was Koro Sensei. He was very friendly and happy. And then later, he finds out that like years and years later, that one of his students had gone on to unalive because he was bullied. And he completely changes his
ethos,
his mentality about teaching people.
Yeah.
And then, so first of all, that's how he becomes how he is. It's like, instead of teaching them like wholesomely, he teaches them to like win no matter what.
To be strong. That's kind of
on the backs of others.
He's like, you have to be strong. You can't let anybody break you. Yeah.
But the first thing he did was he found the bullies and like manipulated them into becoming like gamblers and alcoholics. And just ruin their lives.
There was a moment, and they were so slick how they did this.
Yeah, they were ultra slick.
They showed him like walking somewhere, and he goes to a park. And there's a guy sitting on a bench. And this is before he explains his story. And he throws money on the ground. Like, and he's giving some like speech or some ridiculous, evil sounding speech. And then after he tells the story about the original E-class, it's like, oh, that's one of the people he's ruined their lives.
Same guy.
He made him into a homeless guy. Yeah.
Yo, I was like, this man is vicious.
Yeah.
And I love that they did that, because I think stories more so are kind of leaning into the likable villain versus, I'm evil for the sake of being evil. It's more of, I have different motivations. And so based on who the main character is in the story, I'm the evil one. Because if you think, because his story is so tragic, the reason why he would take such a hard reverse stance to how he teaches, like you empathize with him, especially after hearing his story. But even before that, he's still like he seems like he's really forceful and intense, but he's not like, I guess, the tropey villain where he's just a bad guy and using dastardly tactics to get his stuff to work. He's like, no, you do it. Everything we do, we're going to win. It's going to be fair, but I expect excellence. It's like, okay, I can get behind.
And he's the perfect foil for Koro Sensei, because on one hand, you have this scientist who keeps trying to like bring a bigger and bigger monster to kill him with, and like set him up in ways that'll like expose his weaknesses. But then this guy just effortlessly foils him, right? Because he's extremely manipulative, extremely competent and intelligent.
Yeah.
And Koro Sensei can't use any of his like physical strengths to do anything about it. He has to fight him on his own terms, which thankfully Koro Sensei himself is also very intelligent and like can see through. He's just philosophically and in terms of strength is like the exact opposite of Koro Sensei. So that was really cool. I liked him a lot.
Something y'all were talking about how Nagisa being the main character is because he's the closestly aligned to Koro Sensei, becoming like assassin wise, and he basically used his assassin skills to like become a teacher. I feel like the principal was almost
Asuna.
Like he's basically the other side of Koro Sensei as well, because he clearly had the skill set to basically do anything. Like, remember, they were like, why are these people teachers? like he legitimately could do anything, like if he really wanted to. But it's just that, like, the way that they think in those skill sets, it's an interesting dynamic that, like, the show's premise is that being an assassin is the same as being able to teach a student. Being able to understand how people work and how to manipulate them or end them or, their weaknesses and their strengths is what a teacher does. Teachers are assassins.
So...
Yeah. Go ahead. No. Yeah.
So the question I was going to ask you guys earlier, right? my thinking about the second season and the lack of the weird pacing is partially because the students lost their will to kill Koro Sensei, right? So there's several episodes,
Yeah.
like a whole arc that deal with the question, do we have to kill Koro Sensei after all? And if we don't, should we? Right? Because like that's what their whole year is about. And part of the argument that some of the students have is like, well, maybe we don't have to kill him. Maybe he's not going to destroy the earth and we can stop that from happening.
Yeah.
But even if that's true, we should still kill him because that's the nature of our like relationship with him. And to not do that would be a betrayal. So my question to you guys is like, what did you think about that question? Did you side with the students that were like, we should try to save him and like, you know, live together happily? Or did you side with the students who were like, no, we should kill him anyway and, you know, just be done with it?
So yeah, I remember that it was like the last probably like 8 episodes, but it was because they found out, you know, after Kayano's outburst, they found out Koro Sensei's backstory, which is super tragic and nearly an accident. Like, you know, they empathize with him on the assassin level, you know, that's where he started, and like he was made into a monster, and then the woman that he loved accidentally died because he couldn't do enough. And the reason why he would destroy the earth isn't because he wants to, but because of the same reason why the rat did, which is because the organisms that gain the tentacles like he has are unstable. And so after, you know, hearing that being the backstory, like nothing he's done as far as evil, quote unquote, has been intentional, then I was like, yeah, you know, I was in the camp of try to save. But I understood, and I think that's why they made such a compelling argument, because they did talk about, well, because they had such a deep relationship with him on the level of assassin, because he was just as much a professional assassin and took pride in the life of an assassin as well as an educator. It's like, then it was the choice, do you throw away one half for the other, which didn't seem right either. But realistically, I was in the camp of try to save him.
So I wouldn't say that I was necessarily in a camp per se, but I think that, and I think this is explained in the show in its own way, but I personally think that the only option was to kill him. I think that whole, they're one and the same. To save him is to kill him. That's kind of what I felt about it. So I felt that the camp was absolutely kill him, because think about this. Koro Sensei is very smart. Koro Sensei chose to come to the school to teach. Koro Sensei also has the ability to tell the government to put him in a rocket and fire him as far as they possibly can away from the planet.
Right.
You know, though he can't necessarily fly in space, because I think the mechanisms of his body and stuff like that, and he can't go fast enough to fly out into space. And who knows, maybe the explosion is so big it wouldn't matter where he was. But I think from the very beginning, Koro Sensei already knew he had a 1% chance of exploding. You know, like, I don't think he was confused. He never seemed concerned. And I think Koro Sensei's whole point was to get them to a point where they could kill him. Like, that they would realize that that was the only option, and that killing him was what saving him was. Because he had no life. He has nothing. He has no family. He lost the one person he loved, and there's just nothing for him. And after he killed, even if the government doesn't kill him, even if he didn't die on that day, like, the government's just going to try to kill him anyway, you know?
Right, yeah.
So to me, I think it's just like, this sounds bad, but this is like a very much prolonged, like, you know, not eugenics isn't the word I want to use, but, you know, when somebody decides that they want to die,
yeah,
that process, like, he was just like, this is what I want to do with my last days. Like, his other option was to kill everybody and destroy them, you know, and he came to that conclusion. So to me, I think the right option and the only option was to kill him. And I think that whole, like, practice was more or less just getting the heart of the students all as one and unified to break that confliction. And then eventually they would realize that they have to kill him no matter what happens, you know. Mm-hmm. But they've decided that they want to save him in their heart. So it's like they can now go through the process of killing him, if that makes sense. So,
What about you, Steve?
That's interesting. Yeah, so like looking back on it now, and even as I began the show, I'm thinking of it in terms of like storytelling, and I'm like, okay, of course they're going to kill him. That's the only way to like neatly wrap this show up.
Yeah.
It wouldn't make sense to have an ending where he doesn't die. But as I was watching it and I'm like listening to them talk about it, and I'm also watching all the interactions, I legitimately did not want them to kill him. I was like very sad at the end when they did kill him.
Speaking of sad,
I wasn't disappointed, but I was sad.
Yeah.
I was traumatized. And that's the thing, right? Like, it's cool that like he taught them and he made them grow and stuff, but he also like deeply traumatized these children. Because they murdered murder is probably a strong word, because it was the nature of their relationship, and it was very much like consensual. But they did slowly knife a guy who was probably one of the first people to like take an interest in them in their entire lives, other than maybe their parents. And so that's hard, right? And in my head, I'm like, I feel like he could have, assuming he doesn't explode, and you're right, the government probably would always chase him, but maybe he could convince them not to. I feel like he could have a good life teaching kids. Like, he really enjoyed it. And there's definitely other, problem classrooms in the world that could have benefited from his extreme teaching style. But no one else gets that. Now they have to deal with Nagisa, who I'm sure is going to be a great teacher, but is just a human at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. So I felt like it was a huge loss that they had to kill him. I was very sad. I was sad.
So Kyle, you're about to say something? Is it?
Yeah. Speaking of the being sad, like how grievous, just how gut wrenching the whole process of them assassinating him was. Like,
yeah, that was brutal. Dude.
They extended that scene far longer
than they needed.
It was like a whole half episode.
It was, like you just start off with, because early on in the show, when I think they all got like they reached the top 50 in one of their academic things, and he was like, "I'll reveal a big secret about myself." Yeah. And I think that was the time he said, "If someone grabs my limbs, I can't move because I'm not strong, but I'm fast."
Yeah,
pretty much. And so then that being, their biggest achievement, also being the way that they eventually kill him, was like, the first jab. And so then they're like this is after the fight where he literally spends all of his power and strength protecting them, revives Kayano, and pretty much makes every case in the world for them to save his life, because he gave everything he possibly could to show that he was a good person. And now he's laying there defenseless. Like, this is their opportunity, their golden opportunity to finally trap him. It's like, oh, well, that sucks. And then he was like, before I die, I want to do one more thing. Just let me call roll call one more time.
Bruh.
And then the slowest name by name
roll call.
So, you know what? Man. Now that I think about it, it wasn't even the last episode. It was the second to last.
Oh, you're right. Yeah.
I think they might have used most of the episode for that.
It was still really long.
Yeah, it was the second to last episode, and then the last the last 3 minutes was them all just like depressed,
bro,
crying on their huge yearbook.
Pay those voice actors triple for the way that they were heaving in that microphone, man. The way they were crying, bro. Like, that jump was real, man.
Can I say something? And I might be
no.
People might not like me, but
you I already don't like you, that's fine.
No. To me, like, that whole moment, like, did not touch me at all.
Say that
because like,
because you wanted him to die.
Yeah, I mean, one was just that I was like physically tired of the show at that point. Like, I was like, yo.
So anyone listening, Brad watched the last 2 episodes, I think it was today, and he only watched them because me and Kyle insisted that he actually
I was
finish the show.
100%. I
You definitely was going to skip.
No, I wasn't going to skip him. I was just saying that it doesn't matter to me because I already know how this ends. Like, it's to me, I had already seen the like once they got to a certain point, I was like, oh, I know exactly how this ends. Like, oh, they already told you how it ended. So to me, it was just like, let's get there. And I thought it was very like to me, like if I was in a place where this show spoke to me personally, I would 100% feel like I would connect to it. But to me, I thought it was more important that Koro Sensei does die and that he dies by the hands of Nagisa. And one thing that Koro Sensei said was like, don't do it with hate and malice.
Yeah.
Like, do it in a way that like, this is what you need to do.
With a smile.
Because he wanted him to realize like, this is not like this is the beginning of your story, the end of me, but I already died. Like, I literally died months ago. But I'm literally just, like, fulfilling the dreams of my lover. The person who I want to spend the rest of my life with. And so to me, like, I know the students were sad and it was all cry and they were, like, building this out. And I thought the roll call was really cool. I loved how they did the text. I loved, the feeling of it. But to me, I wasn't moved because to me, I was just like, this is what this was gonna be. Like
you had accepted it already.
Yeah, I was already like, oh, like the moment he told them about the tentacles, and I mean his random ex-student coming in giant Ganon form was like, to me, like
it was over
the previous the new Reaper.
Yeah, like the final boss battle. To me, I just was like, I get it.
That's what I'm saying. Imagine the show was like that and it was all about action. That would have been suck.
Yeah. I mean, and no, I agree. And to me, I just felt like, yeah, this is stupid, but they need this. They need this so he'll be tired. Because at the end of the day, Koro Sensei, like, he says that he doesn't want to die, but he's doing everything to die. So, like, I feel like at any moment he could have just put his tentacles out there and let them grab him and kill him. But it was all, he had a purpose. That wasn't the point. Yeah, that wasn't the point. Like, he could have died at any moment, but like, and he wanted them to kill him so that they could get that, we did it, we accomplished it. And
you can answer this for me. If I'm remembering correctly, wasn't he about to be killed by that giant space laser if they didn't kill him, like, right then?
Yeah, I think so. It was still in the sky above him.
Theoretically, I mean, he didn't die the first time, and I guess...
And he was in the bubble, too.
Yeah, and they trapped him, but, like, I just think that if they did shoot him with it, the writers would have said, aha! I actually threw one of my cells outside of the bubble before we started. And I knew that this time would come and I was going to reform from that. So to me, like, that was all moot. Like, it didn't matter. The whole point was just...
The kids had to do it.
They just had to do it. And he wanted to do it by their hands. I feel like Koro Sensei knew exactly what was going to happen the whole way. Like, he was just there. So, I don't know. The moment just... It when I say it fell flat, I meant more just like, this is inevitable. So I wasn't moved because it kind of felt, like he died the day that his lover died. And this was just an extended note of death.
Oh, yeah. And they brought him a birthday cake.
Mm-hmm.
Bro.
Yeah, it was all meant.
It was the saddest setup.
He was already dead. I actually thought it would have been a better, more emotional ending is if he left but didn't die. Like, he left the planet because and
he's like disappointed in them because they can't kill him.
No. Like, they killed him, but he was like, actually, you can't kill me. I'm actually unkillable. Like, but I want to show you that you could, and I can't stay with you because I don't want to risk your life, but I want you to know that I love you. I have to go and now live a life of loneliness and sadness without you in order to protect you. I'm going out into space. Boom, and he flies away. Like, to me, that would have been really sad because that means that Koro Sensei doesn't get peace, but he's kind of like this character that has to bear the burdens of all he's done throughout his life as an assassin, the loss of his love, what he's done to other people, and now he can't be with his loved students, To me, that would have been sad.
And they don't get what they want.
Yeah. you know, and it's just
it's
truly. But
that wouldn't just be sad. That would be a bad ending. I think this was the only good ending.
Yeah, I mean, this was like I said,
that would have been a cop out for sure.
Yeah,
yeah.
I thought they might go that direction, but I was like, nope. The obvious thing is they kill him. Nagisa does it to you know.
Oh, so that's another thing to me that I think also kind of pushed the idea of Nagisa being the main character. Is like whenever the show had like a really intense moment and they paused for dramatic effect. They did it so often. It's like I always expected that it was going to be Nagisa to come out of the shadows or be the one the camera pans to every single time. And it got to the point to where it would just pull me out of it because I was like, well, why don't you just do it? Because like waiting for him to show up, because they did it even at the very last scene, which kind of hurt it for me. Was like all the kids were pinning him down and they were like, oh, who's going to do it? Who's going to stab him? And it's like, obviously, the only person we haven't seen in the shot, on top of the only person anyone's ever talked about for the last 6 episodes being Nagisa, like obviously he's going to do it. And so for me, it was like one of those things where the writers wrote it in for dramatic effect, but then it didn't really hit because they'd used the trope so many times.
Yeah.
And I think I'll say this. I think this show was not written for adults. I think it was written for children. And I think if you're a child, that's definitely much more like not, it's like you kind of know it, but you're not smart enough, kind of, sort of, you know.
You hadn't experienced it enough.
Fair enough.
Like, yeah, that's fair.
You know, so I think that, like, to me, once again, it's like when you see the Matrix, you know, it doesn't scare you anymore. You know, so I know we're coming closer to the end. So I wanted to kind of like touch on some of my favorite moments throughout the show. And I don't know if y'all have any, but I have quite a few. So I'm just going to throw them out. So first one is, I actually posted it on LinkedIn. So y'all might have saw it. Was I did a screen cap of Koro Sensei with his back to the screen and him like looking through like the woods and the forest and the blue sky. In the quote he said, which I was like, this is one of the greatest quotes I've ever heard in any show. And it's something that I like now live by. The difference between the novice and the master is that the master has failed more than the novice has tried. Yeah. I legit stopped the show right there. And I was like, that was the most emotional I got in the whole show. Is when he said that. Like, I legit was like, whoa. And the way they did it, the music, the shot, like, it was so beautifully done. I was like, whoa. You just touched me, Koro Sensei. like senpai, you know, like
he even reached out. He even touched
his tentacle touched me in a way that I've never been touched before. So
I'm not gonna laugh at that.
It's not a laughing matter, but honestly, that was a beautiful moment. Another moment for me was when the principal was with his son, and the son was explaining like some stuff about like his group, like he wanted to protect them, and like he's like, these are my people, and he's like, you know, me and my friends, right? And then his friends like, you were totally about to call us minions, weren't you? Like,
that was a great moment.
I literally laughed out loud. I was like, that's pretty funny. Like I felt like some of my favorite moments of like comedy came from the son and the principal, like just the goofiness in general. Okay, another moment is toward the end when what's her name again? The girl who was an actress, Kayano, when she's in the hospital, and no, after when she finally like is talking about her love for Nagisa, and she says, his bloodlust filled the hole in my heart.
That's so stupid.
And I was like, I'm done with this show. Like,
Valentine's Day episode.
Actively done. Another thing was, I was really concerned about the direction they were going when they went on that trip on the island and those thugs kidnapped the girls. And I was like,
oh yeah, that was very problematic.
This is gonna be a sexual assault. Like,
it was scandalous.
Like, they weren't like talking to them like, ha ha ha, like, we're gonna beat up your friends when they show up. They were like actively plotting.
In a dark warehouse on a couch. Like, none of it looks good.
I've seen the pictures of you at the club and you looking all good, and like, I was like, okay, I don't like any of this. Which brings me to my last point of I just felt like the whole plot on Nagisa looking like a girl
was so dumb.
and them continually like first getting in a cross dress at the club, which was kind of funny, like in the sense that they were like using that as like a ploy, like, and it makes sense because now from a plot standpoint, like it feels a lot less inappropriate. It's just he looks
and
like
they needed that guy at the end to post about it in his blog,
you know.
stuff.
So I get that, but my biggest problem was like when like one girl just kept on trying to like make him wear dresses and like, you know, it was just got really, really weird to me.
It was uncomfortable.
Yeah, and like he was genuinely like, "Hey, like this isn't funny anymore." Like,
yeah, I'm glad that he like stood up for himself. And I was like, I don't like this. It's not great.
And I was like, the writers, it almost felt almost too real. Like he was saying to the writers, like, "Hey, can we stop with this whole plot line? Like, I feel really uncomfortable with this," and they just really kept pushing it. Like, you know, like I don't know, it felt really weird and kind of creeptastic at times. So anyway, I threw out a whole bunch of stuff, but I had a whole bunch of notes.
That was your favorite part, was him being a girl?
Yes, that was my favorite part.
I have a comment about that too, though, because whenever I first started watching it, they would make the comments, but before they even said anything, I was like, why is he drawn so femininely? Like they gave him hips and like his whole body type and like the way his pants fit.
The way he wore his pants, yeah,
and the long hair. And I was like, maybe this was just, you know, a design choice. But then they had the swimming episode where they made the pool, and the girls, they were like, oh, so Nagisa is a boy because he didn't have his shirt on.
Yes.
And I was like, okay, so the characters acknowledged what I was thinking.
I wrote it down.
Exactly.
Like they were like, we weren't sure.
Yeah, but then it took that turn like you were talking about where they still went in and doubled down on like him looking like, even though like obviously my man, you know, he just pretty. Leave him alone.
He just soft.
I think my least favorite part of that was the guy at the club who thought he was a girl and like came back later and still thought he was a girl. And I'm like, dude,
that was rough.
You gotta let this man down immediately.
And Nagisa was like, all right, look, man, I gotta tell you the truth. I can't do this no more.
The guy, he was denying it at
like,
first.
He's like, no, I'm a dude. He's like, no, you ain't. You ain't no dude.
No, you ain't.
Fine, girl, you fine. He's like, no, seriously, dude. And then what?
It's like that episode of Atlanta.
And then somebody,
yo, that's a man.
And then somebody was like, just show him your junk. And I was like, yo, y'all are out of control, like
out of pocket.
All right.
But I do have some favorite moments too.
Go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah. So my one I have written down is so the daycare episode. I don't remember the principal's name. But he was just the realest character. Like every time,
the old guy?
Yeah, every time they would say something, he would just shut down.
Shut it down.
He was in the worst mood the whole time. Like, and that was like they tackled this man on his bike, so I get it.
Pretty bad.
But he was one of my favorites.
He's like, I'm gonna sue all of y'all.
Yeah. And then my it wasn't a favorite thing, but something that really stuck out to me. So you ever see those memes about like the show when you're watching it by yourself versus when your parents walk into the room? So I had one of those moments, but it was with my wife. And so nice. I'd watched like a handful because we started watching it together and, you know, it's pretty tame in the beginning. And I watched a couple episodes by myself. And then, of course, we would decide to watch an episode over dinner. And so the episode that comes on was when they go to the beach. And the character that we really haven't talked about much, Irina, the Professor B, comes.
Oh, we had not talked about her. I totally forgot.
She comes on screen in the most skimpy bikini,
clad.
And like they full body on screen for a solid like 10 seconds. And I'm just like going back and forth, looking at my wife, looking at the TV.
Like, baby,
like,
stop.
Well,
look like.
I didn't say anything because that's one of the reasons why we had to start watching another anime was because, of course, whenever she sat down and watched it, they were doing like ridiculous stuff. I had to explain, like, no, this isn't why I watch it. I promise. And so, of course, when I was watching with Mrs. Yams, that's the first thing that comes on screen. But she didn't say anything this time.
Because she knew. I want to just add this. One thing that Koro Sensei, they really, you know, he's the lecherous, pervy guy. That whole thing with the bug catching episode where, like, they basically threw a whole bunch of adult magazines in the forest to, like, distract. I was like, this is getting out of control. Like
it was a lot.
Y'all need to chill out.
And then they kept setting them up.
Yep.
Had magazines everywhere. You had bra kebabs. Like it got that whole episode was crazy.
Wow.
They did too much. But yeah, so that's all I got.
Steve, you got anything? Steve.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate. I really appreciated all the team building episodes. The assassination ones were cool, but I like one I forgot to mention earlier was the like paintball episode where like there's two teams and each of them was like using the best, or each of the commanders, Nagisa and Karma, were like using the best aspects of all of their little teammates.
Yeah.
And they're explaining like, oh, this guy's in this position and they're doing this and they're doing that. And I was like, this is really cool. It was really satisfying. So all the team stuff where they would like explain how the different students with the different skills were participating. And like they were competent. It was just satisfying to see them be good at stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like pull it off and like be proud of themselves for it. I mean, that's fun to watch. I liked hearing the backstory about him and whatever her name was.
The teacher girl.
Augury.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The scientist girl. And it was really satisfying to watch him beat that scientist at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And hoisted by his own petard, right? Like
right.
Literally blew him into the anti-tentacle force field that would have been fine if he hadn't just doped himself up on tentacle juice.
And he only moved fast once he put it in. He didn't even use it.
Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, there was a lot of, I loved watching the other classes try to look down on E-class, but then E-class like stand up for themselves or just be happy or like get posters when they weren't supposed to get posters.
Yeah.
And also, like watching them like be upset that they can't keep looking down on E-class was really great. So like the sports games, the sports episodes, I meant. Whatever the poll
that's
game
definitely
was.
a super Japanese game.
That was a really, really cool episode. I really liked that episode.
Yeah, it was a good one.
Was cool. One thing that I wanted to say is that like it's interesting that it was almost like they had to always conceal how gangster they were. But like in the sports game with the pole one though, it was like one of those situations where it's like, yeah, y'all are pretty gangster, but like there is a difference between a grown man fighting you and you as a child. Like when they had the American transfer students, like they still had to like respect their size and like they just had to be very calculated. So I thought it was cool how they matched it up. Like, oh, they're very talented, but they still are like children. Like
have to be tactical.
They're not OP. Yeah. I liked the space episode too. It wasn't like a great episode, but I just liked that they decided, let's just go into space one day.
And the astronauts
doesn't make any
awesome.
sense.
They were heartwarming to me. He's like, you know what?
Yeah.
yeah. I think. I wanted to say this before we end. One thing that the show had these all of a sudden absolutely raw moments. The scene where the original. Koro Sensei's original name. What was his original name?
The Reaper.
The Reaper. When he escapes the facility the first time, and he's just going absolutely loco, like murdering everybody, and then he throws that knife like at the scientist, like straight into his eye.
Oh, through the acrylic thing.
Yeah. He was like, put out the acrylic wall, and he's like, nope, your face. I was like,
that was pretty cool.
This is like. You're a child watching this show, and then you get traumatized. Like, that whole scene.
Yeah, you weren't expecting any of that.
I don't think it's a show for children. It's a little juvenile, but I don't think it's for kids.
I think it's like middle school to high school age. Like, not kids.
Maybe high school.
I think like how kids view violence is very different. Middle school.
There was violence and adult
like
themes.
Suicide, sexual stuff.
I think that's all middle school, high school stuff, man. Like,
all right.
That's definitely.
Maybe I'm sensitive.
If you went to my middle school, that was middle school.
I mean,
that's true.
It was.
I didn't see the things you've seen.
It's present, but would you want them watching it? I guess is the question. Like, would you?
They would.
I definitely would.
They would be watching it. And then also you got to think culturally, this might be different. Anime's very
for sure.
And the stuff I've seen, anyway, I can't even talk about some things I've seen in other places. So anyway, like, Koro Sensei. Everybody wants you to be their senpai, and he was definitely motivational. I feel like the show overall just was like made me step away, being like, you know what, it's important for us to like believe in other people and to like not discard people just because they're difficult. You know.
You actually made me think of something too. But you can go ahead.
No. You have some. Yeah, go ahead. What were you gonna say?
So yeah, one thing there was something that kind of did bother me about the series, in the form of, I guess, like teaching all kinds of students and the weaknesses and uncovering their strengths, is that in general, Koro Sensei had it kind of easy because the kids were troubled. They had like emotional damage, but they were all like really able-bodied. Like only one of them was overweight, and then some of them were like kind of short, but like none of them had like disabilities or like health problems or anything like that. That I feel like would have. I don't know how you write that stuff into it. So I feel like what they did was really good. But I was interested. I would have been interested to see like, oh, this kid's in a wheelchair, but he wants to be or like you're teaching an assassin class, you know. And then the robot girl was like the closest thing to a student that was outside the bounds of the other ones as far as like physical abilities.
A robot.
But when they didn't need her, she just wasn't in the episode. They just cut her out. So
or she was on somebody's phone.
They did her dirty.
On somebody's phone.
So I would have really been interested in seeing a character who had like some big issue that was beyond emotional.
And one thing I do want to know is they did actually show it at the end, is that Koro Sensei actually was not in a bad class. He was in the lowest of the high achievers, right?
Yeah.
And then when Nagisa became a teacher, he went to the hood.
He did.
And he had to teach straight grown men who thought he was a girl. It was like and then he put the fear of God in them. But it's like, it's funny that Koro Sensei actually didn't teach the hardest class, and like Nagisa is probably gonna have to work harder than Koro Sensei
a lot harder.
After that scene, I was like, "There's no way he got away with that every class."
He definitely gets fired from that.
Well, he gets jumped first. Like he's still a human. Like they're gonna jump him, and they're gonna find out. It's like, okay, he did it to one guy, but he can't do it to 12.
Well, he's an assassin.
I don't know. He might be able to.
And he's a grown man now. Well, a grown child. So
he grew a centimeter, I think.
I thought that was disrespectful. I was like, come on, give him a little bit of like, you know, like he grown up now, you know, and then Karma's like 6'3" or something.
Yeah. Ridiculous.
Karma's the man's man. Really working at the bank or whatever.
About to be the politician, rule the world. But yeah, you know, I'm gonna keep our outro pretty short here. Thanks to you so much, everybody, for listening. I mean, as you can see, we have, I don't know, I feel like we all walked away like, not the best show we've ever seen, but I think we all enjoyed it and got some like good moments from it. So we definitely have to do our next deciding what we're gonna watch episode very soon. You know, in the coming weeks. So
I vote God of War to be what we play.
that's default. That's default. I think that's just default slotted in. And actually should be dropping like this week
in a couple weeks. Yeah,
like pretty soon. I think it's now. Like, doesn't it come out like this week? But anyway.
My bad.
Probably by the time you listen to this and watch this, it's probably out. But yeah, we definitely got to cover that. But we also got to choose what our next anime is going to be and what's our next movie. I always love watching anime and movies with y'all. It's great to discuss it. So, hey, if you have any thoughts about Assassination Classroom, something we missed, we did not talk about Irina or Professor, you know her name. If you got some thoughts about that, or Karasuma, or any other characters we missed, please. There's so much to cover. There were so many episodes. That's why it took us so long to finish this and talk about this. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. Of course, I got to thank the brothers themselves. What up, Kyle? Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you, sir.
Always a pleasure. Last note, there is a live action version on YouTube that I intend to watch. Yeah. I'm going to share the link.
Yes, I think there's an actual live action movie that I saw recently, I think on Netflix or Crunchyroll or something for Assassination or something. I saw something, but anyway.
Otherwise, always a pleasure.
You know, so
great to be here.
Of course, Steve, thank you for being here, my brother.
Greeting. Yes, you're welcome.
Yes. And of course, thank
you, Brad.
Oh, well, thank you always.
Thanks, Brad.
Yes.
I guess.
Yes, you guess. Thank you.
Thank you, Koro Sensei.
Thank you, Koro Sensei, for doing what must be done, being
the needful.
Yes, we needed you. I wish I had a Koro Sensei in school. I'd actually be able to read now if I had a Koro Sensei. Yeah. But that's why I only listen to audiobooks.
Hey.
I gotta tell y'all about that. But No, really, Super Agile Nation, we're so thankful for y'all. Thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for liking. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for supporting. Thank you to everybody out in the Discord. Thank y'all for always just being great family. We really appreciate you. We're so thankful to be here. So as for those who don't know, we are everywhere. We're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud. We in these streets. As we always say, you can just Google us, Super Agile Bros, and you'll find us. But thank you so much for watching, and we look forward to sharing some more of our opinions and thoughts as adult nerds out in these streets. So, until next time, y'all take it easy. Peace!